The first time I spoke publicly about living with Crohn's disease was at the Melbourne Comedy Festival in 2011 in a one-man musical comedy show called Chronic. I did a joke about how an ostomy bag is like an iPad, because they both come with accessories and you can do your business on the go. And the head of Crohn's and Colitis Australia at the time was in the room and asked if I'd like to tell my story at Parliament House. And so I did. I spoke seriously about my illness for the first time here in Canberra in 2011. And after my talk, a politician came up to me and said, "Mate, it must be hard talking about Crohn's in the media because it's not a sexy illness." And it was funny that Bronwyn Bishop would say that to me because a few days later, one of my friends entered me into a competition on a radio station called Mix 106.5 FM to find Sydney's sexiest man voice. And so to all those who say you can't talk about bowel disease in the media because it's not sexy enough, I won. And I've been doing it ever since. In fact, I've now spoken about my bowel on 4 different continents. I'm thinking of writing a book one day and calling it Incontinence on 4 Continents. I heard a great quote at a conference recently: "Statistics are human beings with the tears wiped off." So today, because this is not a comedy show, and because I'm speaking on behalf of over 100,000 Australians living with IBD, many of whom are struggling desperately, I've decided to put the tears back on. As an ambassador for CCA, I've attended a lot of talks, lectures, PowerPoint presentations on the impact of IBD on a young person's life. I've seen every combination of lines, curves, and geometric shapes charting the progression of the illness, from pre-diagnosis through recovery, remission, and relapse. I've seen numbers, percentages, and weird mathematical symbols trying to communicate the disruption IBD causes to every aspect of a young person's life: their mental and physical health, body image, self-esteem, social life, education, career, finances, relationships. And it all feels so abstract. It's not that the stats lie, it's just that they tell so little of the truth. There's such a gulf between information and experience. So I've trained myself over the years to see through the numbers, kind of like one of those magic eye puzzles from the 90s, and see the human beings and the stories behind them, including my own. For instance, when I look at stats about the time it takes between those first feelings that something isn't right in your body to actually getting an IBD diagnosis, what I see are the hard wooden benches in my school science lab when I was 14. I remember how painful it had become to sit on them. I remember the fear of telling anyone about this embarrassing pain, which felt like it was sharp and dull at the same time, like there was poison under the skin. I can remember how I tried to gaslight myself about the pain, tell myself it was all in my head, because it was easier to do that than to face the fact that it was real. And then after 3 weeks, when I couldn't bear it any longer, how my mum took me to our local GP, who examined me roughly for a few seconds and then told her confidently, arrogantly, that I was faking this pain to get out of school. The only other detail I'll need to give you about this GP to help you picture what kind of man he was that he drove a black Porsche with the vanity license plate DR1, number 1 doctor. Personally, I think he was more of a number 2. 2 weeks later, the pain was so bad I could barely get out of bed, but I'd also had the runs for several weeks, so I had to keep getting up to run to the loo. I was going out of my mind with the pain. Eventually, a young doctor came to the house after hours, examined me for a few seconds, and said, "Get this boy to hospital immediately." I went in for surgery and woke up the next day with a large chunk of my bottom missing. Turns out that pain I'd been feeling was an abscess the size of a tennis ball. Or to give it its proper medical name, a perianal abscess, fairly common in people with Crohn's. I'm not sure, but I think that the peri part of perianal abscess has something to do with that peri-peri hot sauce that you put on chicken wings. A week later, after a barrage of invasive tests, I was diagnosed with IBD. So all up, it took about 6 weeks between initial symptoms and diagnosis. And if all you had to inform you was the data, then you might well say, wow, lucky you, that was quick. For a lot of people, as we've seen, it takes more than a year. So when you look at this report, I want you to think about that period of time before diagnosis and about how many days, hours, minutes of persistent pain and fear make up just this one statistic among so many, then you'll really understand how crucial it is that that young person's first point of contact with the health system is a GP that listens to them, ideally one who already knows them and who they trust, who knows enough about the symptoms of IBD to ask the right questions and take the right steps. We need those GPs, or we need alternative pathways to diagnosis and treatment other than the emergency department. When I was diagnosed at 14, there were no support services. At one point, my gastro talked about sending me to a psychiatrist, but that sounded more like a punishment. This was after he'd told me that it wasn't the steroids making me fat, it was me. My parents did the best they could, but I was a teenage boy, and what I really needed was my peer group. But they decided on balance that this pudgy, depressed version of me that returned to school after an 8-week absence was not good for their social status, and so for the last 3 years of high school, my only friend in the world was my guitar. I thought that a perianal abscess was the most painful thing I'd ever experienced, but the pain of rejection was even worse. At the age of 13, a year before my diagnosis, I'd been a school captain, star of the school play, in the sports teams, one of the top students in my year. By 18, I was a shadow of that confident young boy. Nothing wounds your soul like loneliness. But it wasn't just me. I can also see my mum on the eve of my 15th birthday when I discovered another abscess, and we realized I'd be spending my special day back in hospital. She'd made a cake, she'd bought balloons. It was meant to be this joyful day. Mum's always been a tough cookie. She was a childhood refugee from East Germany, never showed any weakness. But that evening she broke down sobbing, and I was the one who had to comfort her and tell her it would be all right. So for every person with IBD in this report, I want you to also see a mum, a dad, siblings, maybe a partner and children. Even though we only count the individual, it's the whole family that's affected. So take those numbers and multiply them. For a long time, IBD was the disease no one talked about. And thankfully, that is no longer the case. Over the past few decades, IBD advocates have used every medium, every communication channel, every means of expression available to spread awareness of this disease and its impact across the globe. Organizations like CCA have helped us to connect with our peers, find support groups, share our stories, and transform our lives. One of the most encouraging results of this has been the number of clinicians who have listened to us and shifted their thinking about IBD. When patients and clinicians work together with the right support from government, we all get better outcomes. One way to offer that support in the IBD sector is to invest in multidisciplinary care teams that include an IBD nurse. When you have a good team behind you, you feel empowered to take back control of your life. All right, here's how it happened for me. In 2008, I launched my debut album with a sold-out show at a venue called The Basement in Sydney. I was 30 years old at the time, 3 years past the age a lot of the best rock stars have already died. I was preparing to go on my first ever tour, but instead I ended up housebound with my illness for the second time in 5 years. Over the next few months, my weight dropped to 53 kilos. This is 83 right now. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. The medication that had helped me last time was now having no effect. The illness took over my whole world. My wife had to go to India for a conference, and when she got back, I was at death's door. I felt so ashamed that I was putting her through this ordeal again. I told her she should leave me and that I deserved to be alone. But instead, she showed me the true meaning of love. With her every word, gesture, touch, she let me know that she was there for me, that there was no judgment, no blame, only acceptance, kindness, strength, love. Her love helped me to finally let go of all the guilt and shame I'd been holding on to ever since my diagnosis and accept, forgive, and love myself. 2 years later, I created my musical comedy show, Chronic. I took it to festivals around Australia and overseas to the Edinburgh Fringe. I started speaking at events, making connections. Suddenly, all those years I'd lost to IBD had a purpose. I turned my pain into laughter. I turned my isolation into community. I melted down my trauma and refashioned it into material. Around the time I won the title of Sydney's Sexiest Man Voice, my wife and I were trying to have a baby. And sure enough, 9 months later, nada, zip, nothing happening. So I went for a fertility test, and I have to say it was a lot more fun than a colonoscopy. At first I was horrified by how much the test cost, but then when I turned on the TV and saw the movie selection, I realized I was getting a bargain. And my biggest concern after that was that I'd only paid for 3 hours of parking. But despite decades of practice, I failed that test, and several more like it. But thanks to an amazing IVF doctor and a very determined wife, we finally got the news we'd been waiting for. We were going to have a baby. That was in June 2012. In October that year, inspired and terrified by the thought of becoming a dad, I finally had the ileostomy surgery my gastro had been recommending for years. I've been in deep remission ever since. Our son Harry was born the following April. He's going to be 12 years old in a few months, and he's nearly as tall as his mum already. We live in a beautiful home, 10 minutes walk from Whale Beach on Sydney's northern beaches. After becoming a dad, I poured my musical and comedy energies into a new project that was all about health, creativity, and family, a children's band called The Vegetable Plot. We've won international awards, played at major festivals, and have fans in over 150 countries around the world who send me messages every day. We've just released our third album as this beautiful illustrated book with a CD in the back. I have a few copies today. It's out on the ABC Kids label, and it was proudly supported by the New South Wales government through Create New South Wales. So along with my speaking work, my teaching with the Sydney Opera House, and the songwriting collaborations I run with young people living with their own chronic health issues, my decision to channel my lived experience into my art has given me a life so wonderful I can barely believe that it's real. I look back at those 20 years where IBD ruled my life, and they feel like a distant dream. The first time I spoke here back in 2011, I was praised for my resilience. That's a word you hear often these days in relation to young people. We talk about building resilience. People tend to talk about it as though it's an individual quality, that it's to do with individual strength and toughness. But that's not what resilience means to me. To me, resilience is a network. It's about the support you have around you that prevents you from falling all the way down. It's the connections and resources you can access, both externally and internally, to lift yourself back up. Resilience is social. Let's talk about another virtue. Recently, I heard an oncologist at the Global Youth Cancer Congress in Melbourne, where I was the MC, listing what you might describe as the quiet virtues of a good doctor. And the one that particularly resonated with me was the virtue of presence, being present for your patients through the good and the bad, whatever direction the illness takes, being a consistent presence in their lives. That's what CCA is for thousands of Australians with IBD. A steady presence, a consistent place you can go for information and support. And that's what we need government to be too. Regardless of which way the political wind blows, we need your support and your attention to stay present. Now, don't panic, but my friends at CCA have asked me to end with a song, so I have brought my ukulele. Hello, Channel 7. Every time I'm on Channel 7, yes, thank you. Thank you to the sound team, thank you. Got my back. Every time I'm on Channel 7 doing something, they always go back to the presenters and they've got this like weird look on their face. That was pretty weird, wasn't it? Yeah, I guess. That's what I like to do. I like to terrify the squares. So I first played this song, actually wrote this song for an event at Parliament House in 2013. It's okay. My dog has fleas. Yep. This event was actually a couple of days after my son was born. It was a few months after my operation. My son had to be born by emergency cesarean because my wife had been in hospital for 5 weeks with preeclampsia. And so she needed constant monitoring and he needed a ventilator to live through the night. So public healthcare saved both of their lives. So I was already feeling grateful towards doctors and nurses in the public system, but my gratitude was supercharged, and it's still very present, my gratitude. So I wrote this song based on notes I took while I was in hospital having that surgery that transformed my life. And I should say I was also on a lot of morphine at the time, so bear that in mind. Not just morphine. I was like, I said to the nurse one day, "What's this thing in my side?" And she said, "Oh, that's ketamine." I'm like, wow, rock and roll. No one talks about work here. No one asks me what I earn. No one dresses in shirts or in ties. The bosses wear pajamas to handle their dramas. Sometimes they wear masks for disguise. I thought this week would be enjoyment free for me, if not filled with misery and dread. But it's been like some magical, musical, mystical, memorable holiday instead. There's no mobiles ringing, no cover bands singing, no adverts for beer to be seen, no pokey machines, no TAB screens, and the floors here are all kept incredibly clean. There's a different woman by my bed every night, but I've never been closer to my wife. It might sound insane, but I'll say it all the same. This is the best holiday of my life. There's ice cream and jelly, there's radio and telly, and no hidden minibar fees. They take my dinner away, ask me if I'm okay, and how else they can put me at ease. There's a tube in my vein that sends drugs to my brain so I can forget about my worries and my strife. I'm drip-fed, cathetered, I never have to get out of bed. This is the best holiday of my life. How is it that saline tastes sweeter than praline when you mix it with fixes of ketamine and morphine? Endorphins are running through my frame. Makes all of the parties I've ever been to feel lame. Who would have thought it could be so much fun to be sliced up the middle by a knife? I'm lying here flying, I can't stop smiling. This is the best holiday of my life. Came here with an organ that was causing distress. Now I guess it's been thrown in the bin. Or perhaps it's in a dish, filling a scientist's wish to cure the condition I found myself in. And I hope one day soon she'll be over the moon, and she'll dance to the drum and the fife, gleam in her eyes and a Nobel Prize, 'cause I had the best holiday of my life. In cathedrals and churches, they're searching for God. They're wondering just where he might be. Well, I believe I just saw him helping an old fella fill up a bedpan with weed. There's no discrimination inside these walls, but outside it's sadly still rife. The young and the old, the weak and the lame, the rich and the poor, they're all treated just the same. And that's why I named this a week that just came the best holiday of my life. It was the best holiday of my life. Thank you so much.